The official story, according to Cassandra Johnson, who now serves as the Associate Deputy General Counsel for the Office of the Army General Counsel, it's important to make an effort to remember what happened to Flight 93, because the civilians on that flight banded together to prevent another tragedy on the ground. Ms. Johnson, who recently visited the crash site in Shanksville with her husband, told a group of students during the recent Defense Department forum to commemorate the tragic events of the 9/11 terror attack that if it hadn't been for those heroes who got that plane right into the ground and smashed into obliteration, that plane clearly we know was destined for Washington, D.C. Johnson told the students that she thinks about that every day. And she says that was a major sacrifice. According to Ms. Johnson, the passengers on Flight 93 had known about the Pentagon and the World Trade Center towers and made a decision to not let their own plane be used the same way. According to Ms. Johnson, it was up to them to not let that happen to any other people. And she told students recently that when you go to Shanksville, you appreciate what they did. They took a vote on the plane. And are we ready to unite and take this plane down on our terms, not theirs? And that just resonates, according to Army civilian attorney, Ms. Johnson. In 2001, 2 decades ago, Ms. Johnson worked as a civilian with the Defense Department's legal community as well. And at approximately 9:37 a.m. on September 11, 2001, when American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon, where she was headed into a 9 a.m. meeting just a little over a half hour late, Cassandra Johnson said she had barely noticed, and she told students that her office's secretary let her and others know that an aircraft had hit one of the towers at the World Trade Center in New York City. And so, for the next few moments, in commemoration of the events that shook America and the world, when according to the CDC, as of August 16, 2002, a total of 2,726 death certificates related to the World Trade Center attacks alone had been filed, all but 13 of whom died on September 11th, in addition to all 64 passengers and crew aboard American Flight 77 and 125 people in the Pentagon, for a total of 184, according to the Department of Defense, and the 44 passengers and crew aboard United Airlines Flight 93. We are going to take a trip to Shanksville to review that story that Army civilian attorney Cassandra Johnson told students just resonates on a day that American Airlines Flight 77 had struck the Pentagon where she worked, with her barely noticing, a particularly significant story during an American tragedy where, according to Cassandra Johnson, they took a vote on the plane. Are we ready to unite and take this plane down on our terms, not theirs, particularly during a time where over 75% of Americans have volunteered to be vaccinated to prevent infection from a biological agent in our invisible enemy fight with a 1.8% case fatality rate pathogen or agent, only 0.5% higher than the chances of becoming a fatality in an automobile accident. But Ms. Johnson would have us believe that 41 passengers and crew decided to take on 4 armed Al-Qaeda terrorists and then crashed the plane into a field in Shanksville, which certainly would sound like a heroic tale before the present realities of closed schools, businesses, libraries, and churches to prevent infection from a biological agent that had found only 80% of the patients in China experiencing nothing worse than symptoms of mild pneumonia, far less threatening than 4 armed Al-Qaeda terrorists. There were over 4,600 aircraft aloft before the terror attacks on 9/11, all of which it was determined had to be landed, but all of the flights involved in the terror attacks had sent a signal to the world, turning off their transponders shortly after takeoffs from Boston's Logan Airport. And that's an important thing to note. Taking off from Boston Logan Airport, Newark Liberty Airport, and Dulles Airport. Rick Cattell, a 1984 alumnus from the Rochester Institute of Technology, recently shared his memories from that day with students about that fateful day when he was a senior FAA official in charge of the busiest air traffic control facility in the world, and had the opportunity to speak for about 25 minutes with the Lebanese hijacker Ziad Jarrah. And he says that during an interview, when he had the opportunity to hear Jarrah's voice again, it rendered him momentarily speechless, still shaken 2 decades later. But in his interview, he stated that the Lebanese hijacker Jarrah's cowardly actions won't ever diminish the bravery of those passengers aboard Flight 93, who Cassandra Johnson, an attorney at the Pentagon, says officially took a vote on the plane, and we are ready to unite and take this plane down on our terms, not theirs. A story that apparently just resonates. But probably the most famous hero of Shanksville during the 9/11 retelling story of Shanksville is Heather Penny, a graduate of Purdue University and a major in literature, who had planned to become a teacher, and who today is a major in the Air National Guard and serves as the director of the United States Air Force Air Superiority at Lockheed Martin Aeronautics Company, who is known for her efforts as a rookie first lieutenant, just back from 2 weeks of flight training in Nevada with only training flight experience, who had been assigned as the first female aviator at the 121st Fighter Squadron in the D.C. Air National Guard at Andrews Air Force Base, who at around 8:45 a.m. was planning the month's training operations, like many lieutenants might be doing, when, according to the History Channel account, someone leaned into the room and said, "Hey, somebody just flew into the World Trade Center." Recalling that morning, Miss Penny, then a lieutenant, said the weather in New York City that day was very clear with blue skies, and we thought it was a small general aviation airplane, or some small aircraft that maybe had messed up their instrument approach. Penny recalled. It was assumed that a general aviation plane, these are generally smaller aircraft, Cessnas, some Learjets, had made a terrible mistake, and they went back into their meeting. And remember, this is someone that's in the Air National Guard. And if you are flying in clear blue skies over Manhattan on an instrument approach, that would be a terrible mistake, because since 1945, when a military aircraft accidentally struck the Empire State Building, there's been a 3,500 feet no-fly zone over Manhattan to make sure that you don't run into anything, like a skyscraper. So no plane should be flying that low, and certainly not on an instrument landing approach on a clear day in Manhattan. Yet, according to Miss Penny, within a few minutes, there was another knock on the door, and someone said, "Hey, a second plane just hit the World Trade Center." And she says that only then it was clear America was under attack, and an enemy or adversary is at its greatest advantage when you are surprised. They rushed to a nearby television and saw the burning towers. As Miss Penny said, that was when we realized that our world had suddenly changed. And according to Business Insider, Miss Penny wasn't even scheduled to fly that day. She wasn't on the flight roster, and every Fighting Falcon F-16 on the tarmac was equipped with dummy rounds and fake munitions meant to mimic real ordnance for training. for which she was not even scheduled that day. For years, according to the Washington Post accounts, Miss Penny was silent about her aviation experience. But since she first began to speak out, the former Purdue University literature major's story has gotten better and better on each retelling. Her father was a combat pilot. She was a third generation of fighter pilots in her family, obtaining her pilot's license at the age of 18. And still, as a lieutenant, didn't know that a general aviation flight flying over Manhattan did not just make a mistake and run into the World Trade Center, the biggest thing in the sky, especially if you're flying in a Cessna. And she always wanted to be like her dad, who flew A-7s in Vietnam. But she was delayed in joining the military because of a law preventing females from becoming combat pilots. And on that day, she had consistently maintained that Colonel Mark Sasseville, now a lieutenant general, said to her, "Lucky," her nickname, "Lucky, you're coming with me." After he had received clearance to fly from Vice President Dick Cheney. And they suited up to scramble while the world was learning of the terrorist strike at the Pentagon, and flew at 400 miles per hour through the billowing smoke, having taken off with no ammunition and a seat-of-the-pants plan to ram Flight 93. According to the account, Sass, the colonel's nickname, planned to ram the cockpit and eject right before impact, while Lucky was ready to ram the tail in a suicide mission. But she also says that on that day, even though she would readily do it all again, it was the passengers aboard United Flight 93 who were the real heroes on that day. And by the time that they had arrived in Shanksville, they could not even locate the aircraft on their radar and could only see the smoke, sparing them the opportunity to go out in a blaze of glory, crashing into a commercial aircraft liner, which Lieutenant Penny, now Major Penny, would gladly do again. General Sasseville has told the press that they don't train to ram aircraft and take them down, which is reasonable to believe. But why their aircraft had to fly through the smoke of the Pentagon after takeoff from Andrews en route to Shanksville is not exactly clear if they were flying a straight line. And according to Miss Penny, with only an okay from the vice president to take off, given to the colonel, without any ammunition, they did not even perform a flight check or file a flight plan, and improvised with two $19 million supersonic aircraft with some directions that they had been provided from the Secret Service. And we all recall from January 6th how long it has been claimed it took the D.C. National Guard to obtain a clearance to assist the Capitol Police during an insurrection. But in less than an hour, Sass and Lucky were wheels up and headed for Shanksville on a kamikaze mission. And according to one later telling of the story, Lucky did not even know if her dad, who had become an airline pilot for commercial airlines, may have been flying the plane that she was planning to take down. Like I said, the story gets better with every telling. This is her story, and she is sticking to it until it gets better. But according to Rick Cattell at the FAA, he was the only person who knew how to attempt to track United Airlines Flight 93. That, like the other aircraft, had turned off its transponder shortly after takeoff from Newark Liberty at 8:42, 40 minutes late, and that had, at 9:28 a.m., acknowledged a transmission from the controller, and just a minute later, now, this is according to the official timeline at Fox News, the Cleveland controller and the pilots of aircraft in the vicinity heard a radio transmission of unintelligible sounds of possible screaming or a struggle from an unknown origin from a press-to-talk communication system where you have to key the mic for someone to hear you on the other end. According to this account, there were sounds of screaming and someone yelling, "Get out of here, get out of here," again from an unknown source. The Cleveland Center controllers, according to this account, began to try to identify the possible source of the transmissions and noticed that United 93 had descended some 700 feet. How sounds of screaming were audible on a press-to-talk communication system is intriguing in itself. But recall that only Rick Cottrell from his air traffic control center could locate the position of United Airlines Flight 93, which had turned off its transponder because of his ability, with many years of FAA experience, to follow the intermittent radar signal target. And according to Mr. Cottrell, he was only able to identify the altitude. And remember, he's only spotting location, position, not altitude. But he was able to identify the altitude when the aircraft transponder reappeared for a split second, as it descended from 39,000 feet to just 4,000 feet above the mountains in Pennsylvania. But according to Fox News, a poll was taken from the other aircraft aloft in the vicinity where flights were being grounded because of the emergency, and at 9:32, a third radio transmission came over the frequency on this press-to-talk communication system. "Keep remaining sitting. We have a bomb on board." Why the terrorists might be keying the mic to tell aircraft control this information is not clear, but according to Fox News, the controller understood and chose to respond, calling Cleveland Center, "You're unreadable, say again slowly." Whereupon, receiving no response, he notified his supervisor, who passed the notice up the chain of command, delivering the news of the hijacked aircraft to the FAA by 9:34 a.m., which is 4 minutes before the Pentagon was struck by American Airlines Flight 77, which news Penny, or Lucky, received after Colonel Shanksville had told her that she was coming with him. So how in the world did they get ready to get into the air to go someplace before the aircraft was even located and identified as hijacked? But they began to suit up, having received clearance apparently from Dick Cheney to scramble in jets with no ammunition aboard. As a retired tactical analyst in the military, who worked in strategic counterintelligence and gained experience in counterterrorism, even standing up the op cell for the U.S. Army after the Oklahoma City bombing and also the Atlanta Olympics pipe bomb, and would say that even 2 decades later, with regard to this official story, somebody needs to put the cake back in the oven because it isn't quite all baked yet. Based upon what I have witnessed of courage in a fight against an invisible enemy, I find it wholly incredible that there was a vote taken aboard an aircraft with 41 passengers and crew where they decided to take on armed terrorists. And a jumbo jet aircraft does not just lose control and fall out of the sky, nor can I contemplate any reasonable scenario where any person of sound mind might consider that is their only viable option aboard a commercial jet liner. What really occurred after United Airlines Flight 93 had departed 40 minutes late from Newark Liberty Airport with 41 passengers and crew aboard, along with 4 Al-Qaeda suicidal terrorists, including Lebanese hijacker Ziad Jarrah aboard? What really occurred in the skies above Shanksville? What was the plan of Lieutenant Lucky, Penny, and Colonel Sasseville? Why is some information about this still classified today? Maybe one day we will finally know, just like the origins of a novel coronavirus. But what a tremendous gain that would be for science, and a tragic loss for storytelling. Live long and prosper, Star Voyagers. This briefing is unclassified. As you were, my name is Major Webb, and by God, I am running for Arlington Public School Board. Let's keep Mike Webb away from our schools. Honest. Carry on. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.
Thunk, I could have had a vaccine.